We live in an age that celebrates clarity of desire. Bookshelves overflow with titles about the law of attraction, manifestation, abundance. Coaches and influencers echo a simple message: be clear about what you want. Get your energy right. The universe is listening. And so we do. We write it down. We vision board it. We journal, meditate, set intentions, and speak affirmations into the mirror with conviction. We decide that we are ready for love, success, rest, joy, healing, wealth. We do all the things we're told will magnetize our desires into reality. But then something strange, almost disorienting happens. When what we long for finally begins to show up, when the offer is made, the connection deepens, the opportunity arrives, we freeze. We overthink. We disappear. We hesitate to respond. We tell ourselves we'll reply tomorrow, that we need more time, that it's not quite right. We feel a knot in the gut, a tightening in the chest, a sudden flood of doubt, and in subtle or obvious ways, we begin to distance ourselves from the very thing we swore we wanted. We ghost the kind person. We fumble the job interview. We cancel the retreat. We say yes and then find ourselves overwhelmed by the weight of receiving. Many would call this fear. But fear is only the visible surface of a much deeper ocean. Beneath it lives something quieter, older, and infinitely more complex. Resistance. Not conscious resistance, the kind we can reason with, but the deep, subterranean kind that lives in the body. This kind doesn't speak in words, it speaks in sensations, in reflexes, in withdrawals. It says no without ever forming a thought. It's not about self-sabotage, it's about protection. You see, the nervous system remembers. It catalogs everything, not just what hurt, but what followed the hurt. If love was followed by betrayal, if attention was followed by punishment, if success brought exhaustion or pressure, then your body internalized a rule. These things are not safe. And so even when you, the thinking self, decide you are ready for more, your body, the remembering self, says, "No, thank you, we've been here before, we know how this ends." So the problem isn't that you don't want more. It's that part of you believes you won't survive more. This is not a flaw. It's not a lack of motivation. It's a highly intelligent system doing what it was designed to do: keep you safe at all costs. And that safety, as you'll come to see, is often the very thing standing between you and the life you say you're ready for. Most people assume that resistance is a sign of weakness, that if you were truly ready, truly aligned, truly committed, you would leap without hesitation. But readiness is not an idea. It is a state of embodiment. It is not the clarity of your mind, but the regulation of your nervous system that determines whether you can move forward or not. Your body is not concerned with your goals. It is concerned with safety. And if the path to your goal feels threatening, even in subtle, subconscious ways, your body will create every kind of invisible barrier to slow you down. This is why resistance feels so mysterious. It doesn't always shout, it whispers. It disguises itself as procrastination, perfectionism, forgetfulness. It shows up as confusion, doubt, overthinking. It makes you tired when you need energy, restless when it's time to sleep, silent when it's time to speak. It cloaks itself in logic, offering what sound like very reasonable justifications. Now isn't the right time. You need more experience. You should wait until you feel more confident. But underneath all of it is a single driving mechanism. Your system does not feel safe receiving what you're asking for. Why would safety be the issue, you ask? Isn't that what we all want, to feel safe? Yes and no. We crave the feeling of safety, but for many of us, what is safe is what is familiar. And if what's familiar is self-denial, struggle, instability, or rejection, then anything outside of that, even joy, abundance, intimacy, can feel dangerous. Not because it is, but because it defies the internal map your body has drawn through experience. This is why people can stay in jobs they hate, relationships that hurt, or cycles that deplete them. Because familiarity so often masquerades as safety, and the unknown, even if it's kinder, can feel like a threat to the body that doesn't know how to trust it yet. You can tell your mind a new story, but your body will still live in the old one. And that old story is powerful. It was written in moments of vulnerability, woven through experiences you didn't choose, shaped by environments you had no control over. If love came with conditions, your body learned to associate affection with pressure. If success brought burnout, your system linked achievement with collapse. If attention led to humiliation, then visibility became synonymous with danger. So now, when life offers you love, rest, freedom, visibility, your mouth might say yes, but your body flinches. It contracts. It retreats. Not because it's wrong, but because it remembers. That's what resistance really is. Memory trying to keep you safe. Not truth, not fate, not evidence that you're broken. Just memory, still living in the tissues of your nervous system, waiting to be updated by experience. This is why so many people find themselves stuck in frustrating, repetitive loops, not because they lack discipline or clarity, but because their inner world has not yet been repatterned to welcome what they desire. We chase love, only to sabotage the moment it gets too close. We long for freedom, only to pack our schedules with busyness the moment rest appears. We say we want abundance, then undercharge or overspend when money finally comes. These loops are not random. They are signals, invitations, clues pointing toward the places where our safety has been conditioned to expect only what hurts. You might recognize this in your own life. The sudden disinterest in a person who finally treats you well. The burnout that arrives right after a breakthrough. The restless energy that erupts when things become calm. We tell ourselves stories to make sense of these reactions. It just wasn't right. I work better under pressure. I guess I wasn't that into them after all. But what if these explanations are just mental covers for physiological contractions? What if what you're calling self-sabotage is really self-protection? The body remembers patterns, not logic. It doesn't weigh pros and cons. It doesn't care about the 5-year plan. It responds to sensation, to energy, to familiar emotional landscapes. And if your inner landscape has been marked by tension, unpredictability, or lack, your nervous system will calibrate itself to expect and recreate those states. Not because they feel good, but because they feel known. And what is known often feels safer than what is true. This is where traditional personal development falls short. It tells us to push harder, think differently, override the discomfort. But when you push through resistance without understanding it, you don't dissolve the pattern, you deepen it. You teach your system that force is the only way forward, that your desires are something to conquer rather than receive. And in doing so, you further entrench the idea that peace must be earned, that love must be proven, that success must cost you your well-being. But healing offers a different path. Healing invites you to pause when the resistance arises, not to power through it, but to become curious about it, to ask, what feels unsafe about receiving this? What memory is being activated? What part of me is bracing right now, and why? Because when you meet resistance with curiosity instead of criticism, you begin to unravel its power. You begin to listen instead of override. And that is the first step toward integration, not erasing your resistance, but understanding its root. You can't change what you continue to shame, but what you can hold with compassion, you can transform. Awareness is where many journeys begin. The moment you realize, oh, I've been pushing away what I want, can feel like a revelation. You start to see the patterns, how your body flinches when kindness arrives, how you grow anxious when things go well, how you start arguments when peace becomes too quiet. You begin to name what's happening. You understand that this is not sabotage, but survival. That's powerful. That's necessary. But awareness alone is not enough. Insight gives you the map. Integration teaches you how to walk it. And this is where many seekers get lost, not because they're unwilling, but because they mistake intellectual understanding for embodied transformation. Just because you know your resistance is rooted in trauma doesn't mean you've disarmed it. Just because you can name your pattern doesn't mean your body has stopped bracing. Just because you've connected the dots doesn't mean you're free from their gravitational pull. Real healing happens in the pause between reaction and choice. It happens in the moment you notice your urge to run and decide to stay. In the breath you take before answering from habit. In the space where discomfort rises and you choose not to numb it. These are the moments where new neural pathways are formed. Not in your journal, not in your affirmations, but in the body, in real time, under real pressure. This kind of healing requires more than thought. It requires presence. It requires learning to sit with the tremble instead of rushing to resolve it. It asks you to witness the contraction without immediately fixing it. It asks you to stay with yourself, even when your instincts scream to escape. And it's here that you realize the nervous system doesn't respond to concepts, it responds to experiences. Your body doesn't care that you wrote a beautiful intention on the new moon. It cares about whether you stayed present the last time you were overwhelmed. It cares about whether you allowed yourself to cry when the grief rose, or whether you swallowed it to appear composed. It cares about whether you let the soft part of you speak, or whether you silenced it to protect your image. So when people say, "I've done the work, but nothing's changing," the question isn't whether they understand their wounds. The question is, have they given their body a new experience of safety? Have they stayed through the storm instead of fleeing? Have they breathed with their fear, not to make it disappear, but to prove to themselves they could survive its presence? Because transformation doesn't come from erasing the resistance. It comes from building the capacity to be with it, fully, honestly, patiently. And that capacity is what turns knowledge into freedom. This is why so much of what we call manifestation work often feels frustrating. You align your thoughts, you speak the affirmations, you visualize daily, but the things you desire still feel distant, inconsistent, or fleeting. Not because you're doing it wrong, but because your body may still be holding a story that contradicts your intentions. You say, "I am open to love," but when intimacy enters, your shoulders tense and your breath shortens. You say, "I welcome abundance," but when money flows in, your nervous system tightens, bracing for the loss. You say, "I'm ready to be seen," but visibility still feels like exposure, and exposure still feels like danger. This isn't a mindset issue. This is a capacity issue. The nervous system doesn't bend to willpower. It follows wiring. And unless you've rewired the part of you that equates having with hurting, receiving with risk, you'll keep rejecting what you consciously want. Not because you're ungrateful, not because you're sabotaging, but because your internal system is trying to protect you from reliving the pain it associates with expansion. This is why lasting change doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from slowing down, from cultivating enough internal safety that your system no longer sees goodness as a threat, from creating experiences where your body learns, viscerally, not conceptually, that rest doesn't lead to punishment, that love doesn't end in betrayal, that abundance doesn't require self-abandonment. Because until your body feels safe with what you want, you will unconsciously resist it. And this is a truth many spiritual teachings skip. They focus on clarity, alignment, and belief, which are important, but often ignore the foundational requirement, regulation. Without a regulated system, your energy becomes fragmented. Your words say yes, your body says no. Your vision expands, but your breath contracts. You might appear aligned on the outside, but your inner world is still stuck in survival mode, and survival mode cannot hold the vibration of thriving. So the work becomes less about attracting and more about becoming a safe place for what you desire to land. It's not about chasing outcomes, it's about tending to your internal landscape until the soil is rich enough for receiving. It's about teaching your body, one small moment at a time, that it no longer has to brace against what it once feared. That joy is no longer a trick, that love is no longer conditional, that rest is no longer dangerous. When safety becomes your baseline, you stop bouncing off your desires. You start absorbing them, not through force, but through coherence. There is a subtle but powerful distinction that marks the difference between struggle and flow, between temporary progress and sustainable transformation. It is the distinction between forcing and allowing. Forcing is what most of us are taught to do. We set goals, we push, we strive, we override discomfort, we chase after what we want with intensity, believing that if we just try hard enough, control enough variables, think the right thoughts, and hustle at the right frequency, we'll finally make it happen. But forcing comes from fear. It's the energy of urgency, of insufficiency, of not enough yet. It's rooted in a nervous system that doesn't trust timing, doesn't trust the body, doesn't trust life itself. Forcing says, if I don't make this happen, it won't happen. It's armored, it's braced, it's performance dressed as empowerment, and often it creates results, but results that exhaust you, that collapse as soon as you stop holding everything together, that replicate old patterns in new packaging. Allowing, on the other hand, is born from safety. Allowing doesn't mean passive waiting. It's not the absence of action, it's the presence of alignment. It's what happens when your system feels grounded enough to stay open, when your body trusts itself enough to receive without flinching. Allowing says, I no longer have to earn what's meant for me. It speaks not from scarcity, but from capacity. It doesn't rush, it listens, it doesn't grasp, it welcomes. And here's the paradox. What you allow in safety often comes more swiftly than what you force in fear. Because your energy is no longer pushing, bracing, contorting to fit a version of readiness you've been taught to perform. You're no longer pretending to be fine. You're becoming available to what is real. And in that availability, life recognizes you. Opportunities open. Love approaches. Creativity flows. Not because you fought for it, but because you became resonant with it. This is the work of nervous system healing. It moves you from forcing to allowing, from contraction to expansion, from control to trust. It teaches your body that the present moment is not something to escape but to inhabit, that sensations are not enemies but messages, that fear is not always a stop sign, it's often a threshold. And as you practice allowing, you begin to notice something miraculous. Your desires stop running from you because you're no longer running from yourself. Most of us have been conditioned to treat resistance like a problem to be solved. It's something we try to break through, get over, or push past. We assume that if resistance shows up, we must be doing something wrong. We reach for strategies to override it, productivity hacks, mindset shifts, motivational quotes, all in the service of silencing the part of us that hesitates. But what if resistance isn't a block to overcome? What if it's a relationship waiting to be built? The truth is, resistance is rarely random. It often carries the voice of a younger self, a part of you formed in moments when life didn't feel safe, when your truth wasn't welcomed, when your needs were too big for the room you were in. That part didn't just disappear when you grew older. It adapted. It learned how to protect you. And it's still doing its job, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, trying to keep you from being hurt again. So when resistance shows up, the goal isn't to crush it, the goal is to get curious. Instead of asking, how do I make this go away? Try asking, what is this part of me trying to protect? You might be surprised at the tenderness underneath. Maybe the resistance around being seen is protecting the part of you that was once mocked for standing out. Maybe the resistance around resting is shielding the part of you that was shamed for being lazy. Maybe the resistance around love is guarding the part of you that was abandoned when you let someone in. These aren't flaws. These are intelligent adaptations, and they don't dissolve through discipline, they dissolve through dialogue. To build a relationship with your resistance means sitting with it instead of rushing past it. It means offering compassion instead of critique. It means letting that younger part of you know, you're not wrong, you're not bad, you're just scared, and I'm here now. It means letting your body have the experience it never got, the experience of being met with patience, presence, and gentleness. When you stop treating resistance as the enemy, you begin to recognize it as a guide, a map, a signal pointing to the places where your system is still seeking safety. And the beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require you to be fearless. It only asks that you become more honest, more present, more willing to listen before you leap. Because when resistance feels heard, it softens, and in that softening, space opens for breath, for choice, for change. One of the most confusing parts of healing is this. Resistance and intuition often feel the same in the body. Both can show up as a sudden tightness in the chest, a flutter in the gut, a strong aversion to moving forward. Both can make you pause, pull back, or reconsider your next step. And if you've been taught to trust your gut, it's easy to misread fear-based contraction as soul-level guidance. But here's the truth. Not everything that feels like a no is your truth speaking. Sometimes it's your trauma remembering. Your intuition is wise, quiet, grounded. It speaks in calm clarity, even when delivering a warning. It doesn't panic, it doesn't spiral, it doesn't dramatize. Intuition says, this doesn't align, and leaves it at that. It's steady, subtle, clean. Resistance, on the other hand, is activated. It's fast, it's sharp, it's full of stories and justifications. Resistance says, you'll get hurt, they'll leave you, you're not ready. It pulls from the past to protect the future. It doesn't just warn, it floods. And unless you've cultivated a deep relationship with your body, it can be nearly impossible to tell the difference between a genuine inner no and a nervous system reacting to old data. This is why embodiment matters. You can't think your way into discernment. You must feel your way there. You must learn the language of your own body, not just the volume, but the texture. Is this sensation expansive or contractive? Does this choice leave me with a grounded yes or a high-pitched panic? Is this pause coming from presence or from hypervigilance? The more time you spend inside your own somatic landscape, the more nuanced your perception becomes. You begin to notice the difference between a gut feeling that's rooted in wisdom and a flinch that's rooted in memory. You learn to trust stillness over adrenaline, spaciousness over speed. This doesn't happen overnight. It requires practice, patience, repetition. You start by staying, by not rushing to label every contraction as a red flag, by sitting with the discomfort long enough to ask, is this a no from my soul, or a yes that scares the part of me that once got hurt? Because sometimes, the thing you fear most is not misalignment, it's expansion. And the only way to know for sure is to stay in the room long enough to feel what's true beneath the tremble. In a world that constantly pulls us into our heads, into logic, strategy, explanation, returning to the body is a radical act. But if resistance is stored in the nervous system, then healing must begin where resistance lives. Not in concepts, but in sensation. Not in theory, but in felt experience. Coming back to your body doesn't mean analyzing your feelings. It means feeling them. It means learning to stay with the tremble in your hands, the tightness in your throat, the pressure behind your eyes, not to fix or suppress them, but to listen, to let them move, to let them speak. Because the body is always speaking. It just doesn't use words. It speaks in temperature shifts, in shallow breath, in clenched jaws and hunched shoulders. It speaks in the way your stomach drops when someone gets too close, or the way your chest opens when you finally tell the truth. It speaks in the urge to run and the longing to stay. And when you learn to pay attention, not just with curiosity, but with care, you begin to develop a new kind of fluency. One that allows you to feel without collapsing. One that creates space between stimulus and reaction. This is the foundation of regulation. Not bypassing what arises, but building enough capacity to remain present with it. To breathe through discomfort rather than abandon yourself in it. To slow down when everything inside you is screaming for escape. This slowness is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's what allows you to access choice, even in the heat of reactivity. And yes, this is hard, especially in a culture obsessed with speed, performance, and productivity. Especially when you've been rewarded for overriding your body to get things done. But embodiment is not about performance, it's about partnership. It's about showing your body that you're willing to stay with it, even when the sensations are inconvenient or uncomfortable. Because when your body learns that you won't abandon it, it starts to trust you. And trust rewires everything. Trust tells your system, I don't have to shut down to stay safe. Trust says I can feel this and survive. Trust creates the spaciousness where resistance becomes less reactive and more relational. So if you want to stop resisting what you say you want, don't just work on your mindset. Work on your presence. Practice being with yourself, in your body, especially when it would be easier to check out. Because every time you stay, you are restoring your capacity to receive. There's a common misconception in the world of self-development and spirituality. A quiet myth that suggests if you heal enough, fear will vanish. That one day you'll arrive at a version of yourself so complete, so aligned, so evolved that fear no longer visits. No more doubt, no more hesitation, just effortless flow, unwavering confidence, and constant clarity. This idea is comforting, but it's also misleading. Because real healing does not mean you'll stop feeling fear. It means you'll stop being ruled by it. Healing isn't the absence of fear. It's the presence of choice in the face of it. It's being able to feel fear and still move forward. It's recognizing the old stories rising in your nervous system, and instead of automatically reacting, choosing to respond with presence. It's feeling the familiar contraction in your chest and knowing how to breathe through it. It's standing at the edge of expansion, and instead of running, staying long enough to witness what's underneath the urge to retreat. This is what nervous system regulation makes possible. Not a life without triggers, but a life in which triggers no longer hijack your choices. You don't wait to feel 100% ready. You don't wait for the absence of discomfort. You act from a deeper knowing that discomfort is not danger, that fear is not always a stop sign. And slowly, your body learns that it can hold sensation without shutting down. It learns that not every rise in intensity needs to lead to collapse. It learns that fear can be walked with, not eliminated, but accompanied. This is true empowerment, not becoming fearless, but becoming someone who no longer fears the presence of fear. And when you stop fearing fear, your world begins to open. Your nervous system relaxes its grip, your energy softens, your choices expand. You begin to move toward the life you desire, not with aggression or urgency, but with steadiness. And that steadiness creates space for new outcomes. The mistake is not that fear returns. The mistake is believing its presence means you're failing. But fear doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're growing. It means your system is stretching beyond the familiar. And the question is no longer, how do I get rid of fear? But how do I walk with fear and stay rooted in myself? That question is the gateway to sovereignty. Because courage is not the denial of resistance. It's the capacity to stay present when resistance arises. And that capacity, practiced in real moments, is how healing becomes embodied. It's how new realities form, not through perfection, but through presence. At a certain point in the healing process, something subtle begins to shift. What once felt impossible starts to feel imaginable. What once triggered panic now invites presence. The things you used to chase begin to approach you, not because you learned some perfect manifestation script, but because your energy is no longer pushing them away. The grasping stops. The proving softens. The urgency dissolves. You begin to realize that the life you longed for wasn't waiting for you to become someone else. It was waiting for you to become available in your nervous system. This is the moment where your resistance starts to lose its grip, not because you've conquered it, but because you've befriended it. You've stopped treating it like an enemy and started seeing it as a messenger. You've listened to its fears without obeying them. You've allowed it to speak without letting it steer. And in doing so, you've taught your body that sensation can be safe. That aliveness doesn't have to mean danger. That expansion is no longer a threat. This shift is not dramatic. It doesn't always come with fireworks or breakthroughs. Sometimes it comes in quiet ways, a slower breath, a softer tone of voice, a pause between impulse and action. Sometimes it looks like choosing rest without guilt, or saying yes to love without preparing for loss. Sometimes it means showing up to your dream, not with tension, but with trust. These are not small things. These are holy thresholds. Because when you stop living in reaction to your resistance, you start living from your essence. You stop making decisions from fear and start making them from alignment. You no longer need to force outcomes because your energy is aligned with receptivity. And life, whether you call it the universe, spirit, God, or simply reality, responds to that congruence. Congruence doesn't mean perfection. It means coherence. It means that your thoughts, your words, your actions, and your body are telling the same truth. You're not saying yes while internally clenching. You're not visualizing peace while running on burnout. You're not calling in abundance while embodying scarcity. And this coherence makes you magnetic, not because you're performing worthiness, but because you've stopped betraying your own nervous system. This is the turning point, not the end of resistance, but the end of obeying it. Not the end of fear, but the end of organizing your life around it. You still feel, you still tremble, but you stay. And in staying, you change. And in changing, you open. Because readiness was never about certainty, it was about capacity. And now, finally, you're becoming someone who can hold what they asked for. There comes a quiet but powerful shift on the path of healing when you stop trying to become ready and begin to realize that readiness is not something you chase, it is something you embody. You stop waiting for every wound to be gone, for every fear to vanish, for every doubt to be silenced. Instead, you realize that readiness isn't the absence of challenge, but the presence of capacity. It is not about never feeling resistance again. It is about knowing how to stay present when resistance shows up. And more importantly, it is about creating enough internal safety that your nervous system no longer treats expansion as a threat. This is where true transformation happens. Not when you force yourself to receive what you're terrified of, but when your system feels safe enough to soften into receiving. You don't need to brace, overperform, or over-explain. You don't need to justify your desires, manipulate your circumstances, or contort yourself to fit a mold. You begin to show up as someone who trusts their timing, honors their nervous system, and respects their boundaries. You begin to move differently, speak differently, rest differently. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because your body has stopped bracing for the worst. In this space, manifestation becomes less about calling things in and more about cultivating the capacity to hold them when they arrive. You no longer ask, "How do I get what I want?" You ask, "Can I hold what I already have without shrinking?" You stop treating your dreams like emergencies. You stop outsourcing your worthiness to future outcomes. You become available to the present moment, not as a concept, but as an experience in your breath, your posture, your stillness, your voice. This is the essence of embodied readiness. You are not waiting for a sign. You are not waiting to be validated, certified, or invited. You begin to feel at home in your own body, in your own timing, in your own voice. You no longer seek approval for existing. You no longer shape-shift to earn belonging. You belong to yourself, and that belonging becomes magnetic. Not because you are high vibe or always positive, but because you are congruent. Your energy no longer leaks. Your boundaries no longer bend under pressure. You are no longer performing safety, you are living from it. This version of you doesn't chase, it welcomes. It doesn't collapse under visibility, it stands grounded in it. And it doesn't apologize for wanting more. It simply becomes the one who can hold more, gently, honestly, with breath and integrity. This is not the end of the journey, but it is the end of hiding from yourself. When you begin to live from embodied readiness, your life doesn't suddenly become perfect, but it becomes honest. And in that honesty, a quiet coherence takes shape. You begin to notice that the choices you make are no longer rooted in fear, image maintenance, or obligation. They begin to emerge from something deeper: alignment. You speak with more clarity, not because you always know what to say, but because you are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. You listen with more presence, not because you're trying to be good, but because you're no longer bracing for rejection. Your no becomes simpler. Your yes becomes slower, more deliberate. You're not chasing opportunities, you're choosing them from a grounded sense of what's true for you. Readiness starts showing up in the small, ordinary moments. In the way you pause before replying to a message that triggers you. In the way you take a breath before canceling something just because it feels vulnerable. In the way you hold eye contact when you used to look away. These are not grand gestures, they are micro acts of integration. They are how safety moves through a regulated system. Calm, curious, steady. No longer driven by performance, approval, or fear of abandonment. You may find that the people and environments that once felt safe now feel noisy. The identities that once earned you love now feel heavy. You start to grieve the roles you played to survive, even as you feel the freedom that comes with letting them go. This is the emotional texture of healing, joy mixed with loss, liberation tinged with nostalgia. You're no longer who you were. And while there may not be words for who you're becoming, your body knows. It speaks through your stillness, through your boundaries, through the way you allow space to exist without rushing to fill it. You no longer approach life as a project to be managed. You begin relating to it as a living process. You're less interested in fixing yourself and more devoted to being with yourself. You no longer interpret discomfort as failure. You see it as data, feedback, a call to slow down, get honest, and adjust, not from anxiety, but from integrity. This level of responsiveness is what turns your healing into leadership, not over others, but within yourself. And perhaps the most profound shift of all, you stop measuring your healing by how good you feel. You begin measuring it by how true you're willing to be, especially when it's hard, especially when it's vulnerable, especially when no one is watching. Because now, your readiness is not something you perform, it's something you live. By now, you begin to see that readiness was never about ticking all the boxes, healing all the wounds, or achieving some mythical level of emotional perfection. It was never about arriving at a future where fear no longer exists or where every decision feels effortless. Readiness, real readiness, is not a final destination. It's a state of internal relationship. A deep, ongoing willingness to meet life as it is and to meet yourself as you are. You begin to understand that being ready doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you're no longer afraid of fear. It doesn't mean you're always clear. It means you're willing to stay present through the fog. It doesn't mean you stop contracting. It means you've learned how to breathe with the contraction instead of abandoning yourself within it. This shift is not conceptual, it's embodied. It shows up in how you walk into new spaces without apologizing for your presence. It reveals itself in the way you honor your needs without shame, in how you make room for your joy without guilt. It's visible in how you hold your ground when old dynamics try to pull you back into smallness. Readiness doesn't announce itself, it radiates. It's felt in the spaces between words, in the quality of your stillness, in the steadiness of your gaze. You begin to realize that you no longer need to deserve what's good for you. You've stopped trying to bargain with the universe, trying to prove your worthiness through struggle, sacrifice, or endless self-improvement. You no longer see abundance as something you must chase or manipulate. You understand that abundance is relational. It comes when you stop betraying your own enoughness. And that enoughness, once fragile and foreign, now lives in your nervous system. It's what lets you exhale when love arrives. It's what lets you rest without guilt. It's what lets you stop shrinking when you take up space. It's not bravado. It's not a performance. It's trust, rooted, practiced, embodied. You don't need to convince life of your readiness anymore. You've become it, not through effort alone, but through presence, through the slow, sacred, often unseen process of staying with yourself, again and again, until your system learned that safety is no longer a performance, but a place you carry inside. And this, more than anything else, is what sets you free. Not because life no longer brings challenges, but because you've stopped bracing for them. Not because you've eliminated uncertainty, but because you've stopped outsourcing your stability to what's outside of you. You are no longer waiting for the world to tell you when you're ready. You've already decided. This is the moment you realize that your resistance was never the enemy. It was never proof that you were flawed, incapable, or unworthy. It was never a sign that you didn't want it badly enough. It was a signal, an intelligent, protective mechanism within you that was simply trying to keep you safe, based on an outdated map of the world. It wasn't failure, it was loyalty. A part of you remained loyal to the lessons that once ensured survival. Don't get too close, don't want too much, don't rest too long, don't trust too easily. But now, you are rewriting that map, not by force, not by shame, but by presence. By staying when you would have run, by softening when you would have braced, by breathing when you would have numbed. This presence has changed everything, not because it erased your humanity, but because it welcomed it. Your trembling is no longer weakness. Your pause is no longer procrastination. Your emotions are no longer liabilities to manage. They are intelligence to follow. You're no longer at war with yourself. You're in relationship with yourself. And this relationship, cultivated in quiet, often invisible moments of return, becomes the new foundation of your life. No more chasing worth through achievement. No more shrinking to avoid discomfort. No more waiting for perfection to feel permission. You are no longer seeking life from the outside in. You are creating it from the inside out. This is what embodiment makes possible. It's not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming available to love, to rest, to grief, to joy, to the full range of what it means to be alive. You don't need to be fearless. You don't need to be finished. You just need to be honest enough to stay, gentle enough to listen, and brave enough to keep choosing the truth of who you are, even when it contradicts the stories you were taught to believe. Because in the end, readiness is not a performance. It's not a polished version of you. It's not about having all the answers. Readiness is your willingness to be with what is, without abandoning yourself in the process. And when that willingness is rooted in your body, your energy, your daily choices, it becomes your magnetism. Not because you've finally arrived, but because you've stopped leaving. So if you're still wondering, am I ready for the life I say I want? Ask a deeper question. Am I willing to meet myself honestly, tenderly, consistently, right here, right now? If the answer is yes, even with trembling breath and uncertain steps, then you are not just ready. You are already becoming the life you once thought you had to earn.